We are approaching the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq War. These anniversaries often serve as a time of reflection. So we want to take a close look now at the cost of war. When the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, the Bush administration estimated the war to cost in the ballpark of $50 to $60 billion, but they were way off. Between 2003 and 2011, the war cost more than $823 billion, but the real long-term costs are estimated to be as much as $3.7 trillion. Now, this is, of course, the financial cost. You can't put a price on the thousands upon thousands of human costs in this war. But the government, the government cuts take effect. With the debate right now, with the government cuts set to take effect and tackling the nation's debt, and with the U.S. struggling to get the economy back on track, we ask, how much has the war contributed to the current state of the economy? To discuss, I'm joined now by RT producer Bob English. Bob, great to see you here.
Thank you.
So I guess the big question now, 10 years later, is would we be better off economically if the U.S. didn't spend the billions upon billions of dollars on this war?
The short answer is definitely. If you look at the actual numbers, $823 billion spent. President Obama himself expects it to exceed $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. And anytime the government spends money, you expect a certain amount of waste or fraud. And what we have in Iraq, especially with all these private contractors, are these no-bid and low-bid contracts, as I would call them. And there's been a lot of fraud. So just from that angle, the U.S. didn't need to spend that much money there. And it's unfortunately, if you're going to spend money, it might as well be spent domestically as opposed to in some foreign nation.
Right, and we not too long ago reported on the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction estimated that the U.S. wasted at least $8 billion that was supposed to go into rebuilding Iraq. A lot of these projects we never even saw finished. They were kind of just abandoned. But I do want to ask you, Bob, because we hear this argument, World War II is used as an example, credited for getting the U.S. out of the Depression. So, you know, I think it's no secret that war can be seen as a way to stimulate the economy. We're investing in, you know, tools that are necessary. It creates all these jobs. And some people are going to make that argument when it comes to the war in Iraq. What do you think?
I'm really glad you brought up World War II because that is a great historical lesson. And if we go back to 1939 to 1941, it was actually Lord Keynes in collaboration with Erwin Rothbard, who was a statistician, who invented GDP, what we know as gross domestic product, and other national accounting identities to justify long-term spending. And this was commissioned by the British because they knew that they were going to be in the war for a long time. And prior to this, it was understood that long-term deficit spending would not work. So the reason we have this notion of deficit spending is good today is because of this World War II era. So actually in World War II, we did not get out of the Depression because of it. We got out of the Depression because the government got out of the way after World War II. All the price controls were lifted and free markets were let to, let things reign.
Interesting that you say that. So, because especially today, in this day and age, we have this bitter debate in Washington over how to handle the debt. Would the problem be so dire if it weren't for the debt taken on to finance the war? Because that is how the war was financed for the most part.
Sure. Iraq war was a deeply partisan issue, and the deficit today is a partisan issue. So I think the argument can be made that we spent all this money on a partisan issue. So of course there's going to be, it's going to influence current policy. But when you look at the big picture, what's $1 trillion when we're talking about 12 or 13 trillion dollars in the deficit? I think we'd still have the same arguments today, regardless.
Right. You had mentioned before the contractors, and I think that gets to the heart of the cost of this war go beyond combat and reconstruction. Sure. Veterans are going to need health care for the years and years to come. And to this day, as you mentioned, the contractors are still on the ground there in Iraq. So do the long-term costs outweigh any short-term economic benefits?
I mean, you have to look at the numbers again. We're talking about $3.7 trillion by some estimates, and we have these wounded veterans who are coming home, and they have actual physical wounds, and they have psychological wounds. And is the cost justified in the end? My personal opinion is no. We still have 109 separate private companies over there, and 36,000 people who are not really under the aegis of the government itself, but these private contractors. So the costs to this war are are going to be felt for a long time, and they're by no means over.
All right, Bob, thanks for weighing in there. That was RT producer Bob English.